Breaking just moments ago, U.S. Central Command says they have started conducting additional strikes against Iran. That direct order coming straight from the commander-in-chief. They say the reason for the second round of strikes is to, quote, hold Iran accountable for recent unjustified aggression against commercial shipping and civilian crews freely navigating a vital international waterway. Now, tracking the story day to day and often by minute by minute, CBS News national security analyst and host of the School of War podcast, Aaron MacLean, great to be with you. Okay, I want to get your reaction to the justification for these strikes and what's really happened over the past 24 hours or so.
Well, these most recent strikes are really interesting for a couple of reasons. First of all, the retaliation from the United States we saw last night was notable because of its scale. It was substantially greater in the number of targets struck than the similar strikes a week ago when basically the same thing was happening before. Iranian strikes on shipping in the Strait and then our response. So interesting point one, the strikes are broader and more targets. But interesting point two is in past rounds of this kind of thing, typically what would happen is there would be some initial provocative event, in this case Iran striking these boats, then the United States would respond, and then it would usually finish with an Iranian response to the response as Iran hit, as we saw in the last 24 hours, targets in the Gulf, Kuwait and Bahrain. But this time what's noticeable is the United States is hitting back against those strikes. So yet another step. In the past, it's usually paused just before this round. This time we're taking the next step forward, which signals to me escalation.
Okay, so based on what you've heard from both sides, do you believe we're back at war?
Well, that's a good question, and it sort of depends on what you mean by war. I hate to field the question that way, but here it's actually relevant. If what we mean by the word war is we are going back to the level of intensity of operations that we saw in March and early April, we're not there yet. That remains to be seen. The reports we're seeing coming, sort of trickling in about where these particular strikes might be hitting still seems to be maritime targets in the vicinity of the Strait of Hormuz. CENTCOM says it's striking targets to preserve freedom of navigation. So it's still geographically limited, so we seem, based on these initial reports, to that zone. If we see strikes deeper into Iran, that would be an indication that we could be heading back to something like what you say, something broader and closer to the full-scale war of a couple months ago.
When you say deeper into Iran, are you talking civilian targets or are you talking more infrastructure? I mean, what do we mean by that?
Well, I meant physically, geographically, for example, targets in the Tehran area, targets not directly related to the Strait of Hormuz and the maritime mission set. So that would be one way. Obviously, there are these infrastructure targets. The president has threatened that in the past. He threatened, quote unquote, bridge and power plant day back in early April to go directly after the Iranian economy. We really haven't seen that. You're right. That would be a major escalatory step, which we haven't had any reports of yet. If we saw that, then yes, I think you're definitely seeing indication of a return to something like war.
I want to pivot to another topic that we've been discussing as of late. The president meeting with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky today. What do you know about whether the president is inclined to help Zelensky and how that could manifest given this recent talks with NATO and what's going on with Iran?
Well, if there's one thing about President Trump that you can kind of confidently assert based on his past behavior, it's that he likes to back people whom he perceives to be winning, and he's less enthusiastic about backing people whom he perceives to be losing. And the last few months of news for Ukraine has been decent. Ukraine has had a pretty successful strategic air campaign targeting the Russian economy, targeting, for example, refinery facilities in Russia. Ukrainian strikes have caused a real crisis in Crimea. Russian battlefield progress, while real, is slow, painfully slow from the Russian perspective. So the narrative for Ukraine has been good in recent months. And so perhaps for that reason alone, it's not entirely shocking to see this warmer tone from the president towards Zelensky in remarks that had to be grating to hear in Moscow. Now, what will this result in terms of practical support for Ukraine remains to be seen, but it's certainly a warmer moment than what we've seen in the past.
Aaron MacLean, great to be with you. Thanks so much.